Hello everyone, my name is Aiden O'Vare and my partner is Jonathan Fisher. Today I'll be presenting our case analysis on the Challenger Space Shuttle disaster. We'll discuss what happened and why it's important to engineering ethics. We'll analyze this case using a causal loop diagram and explain how the virtue of courage applies to the decisions that were made. The Challenger disaster occurred on January 28, 1986, during the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger, mission STS-51-L. The shuttle broke apart just 73 seconds after its launch, and all 7 crew members on board lost their lives. The investigation found that the primary cause was the failure of an O-ring seal in one of the solid rocket boosters. Extremely cold temperatures on the morning of the launch had affected the O-rings, preventing them from sealing properly and allowing hot gases to escape. This event became one of the most significant engineering failures in history because of how many warning signs there were present before the launch and how preventable they were. When looking at the Challenger disaster, 4 main stakeholder groups shaped the decision-making process. First was the NASA management. They held the authority to launch but faced intense organizational and political pressure to stay on schedule. On the other hand, the engineers voiced critical safety concerns about how the O-rings would perform in low temperatures, explicitly recommending a delay. Then we have the crew itself, who put their total trust in the safety of the vehicle and the team who built it. And finally, the public school students and the public, whose expectations were at an all-time high due to the Teacher in Space initiative. Next, we'll break down the key variables that drove the system and how they directly affected one another. First, we have the public and organizational pressure pushing for a timely launch, which directly increased NASA's management urgency to proceed with the launch. Second, cold temperatures severely degraded O-ring performance, reducing their elasticity and their ability to seal gases. When engineers raised safety concerns about this temperature flaw, it increased the calculated launch risk. Ideally, higher launch risk should lead to a decision not to launch. However, as management felt the pressure, those safety concerns were sidelined, ultimately allowing the launch to move forward despite the critical risks. This slide shows our causal loop diagram. This diagram illustrates the factors that influenced NASA's decision to launch. The arrows represent cause and effect relationships, while the plus and minus signs show whether those relationships increase or decrease another variable. The diagram also includes reinforcing and balancing feedback loops, which help to explain how multiple factors interacted and ultimately contributed to the disaster. Now that we've seen the pool diagram, let's break down the 2 primary feedback loops driving the system. First, we have reinforcing loop R1. Over time, previous mission successes, despite their near misses, had created a false sense of confidence. This normalized risk in the company, leading management to push even harder to maintain their schedule, making the organization increasingly more comfortable with accepting higher safety risks. Second, we have the balancing loop, B1, which represents the intended safety mechanism. As engineering concerns and poor O-ring performance increased the risk, this loop should have triggered a delay or halted the launch altogether. However, in terms of the overall system behavior, the intense schedule pressure driven by the reinforcing loop R1 completely overpowered the safety balancing loop B1, allowing the launch pressure to override crucial safety protocols, leading to disaster. Moving on to slide 7, we have to talk about one of the most dangerous dynamics in systems thinking, systems delays and how they dictate behavior over time. The first critical delay occurs between perceived launch risk and the final decision to launch. In an ideal system, as soon as risk is identified, that time window is used to halt the progress, run technical reevaluations, and lower the risk. But here, during that delay, management instead used it to pressure the engineers into changing their minds rather than reevaluating the actual physical hazard. The second delay, which took years to manifest, occurs between individual launch decisions and the normalization of deviance. In previous shuttle flights, post-flight inspections showed O-ring erosion and was ignored because those missions had landed safely anyway. The system had misaligned that feedback. and management interpreted the survival as safety. This in turn leads to a long-term behavior because the catastrophic consequences were delayed across multiple successful flights. Dangerous deviations from baseline engineering standards were slowly, incrementally accepted as the new normal. Looking at the bigger picture, this entire situation fits a classic system archetype known as drift to low performance, or eroding goals. The justification here is clear. NASA's original strict safety standards didn't fail overnight. Instead, they were slowly eroded over time because decision makers continually accepted slightly higher levels of risk just to meet aggressive schedule deadlines. Each small compromise became the new baseline until safety was severely compromised. So how do we fix a system like this? We look for a high leverage point, and in this case, that leverage point is safety culture. To improve the safety system, management must empower a strong safety culture that gives engineers absolute autonomy to halt a launch without the fear of reprisal. By doing this, we ensure that the safety balancing loop will always override the schedule pressure, and this will prevent performance from ever drifting downward again. Now transitioning from our systems analysis to our ethical framework, we look at virtue ethics, specifically focusing on the virtue of courage. According to Aristotle, courage is defined as the golden mean between cowardice on one end and recklessness on the other. Making an ethical decision isn't just about following rules, it's also about doing the right thing for the right reasons and with the right disposition. When we translate this definition into engineering, courage becomes a core professional duty. First and foremost, engineers have a primary obligation to protect public safety above all else. This means that having the moral courage to speak up about safety concerns, regardless of the pushback or scrutiny they might receive, and standing firm in those ethical decisions, even when facing severe organizational or external pressure. And to conclude this presentation, let me bring everything together by comparing what actually happened to what applying moral courage would have looked like. In reality, engineers did give clear recommendations to delay the launch due to the critical O-ring safety risks. However, managers feeling intense external pressure from both the public and the organization overruled those concerns, and they decided to launch anyways. If true virtue ethics and moral courage had been applied, the outcome would have been fundamentally different. First, the launch would have been delayed until safety concerns were fully resolved. Second, overall mission risk would have been drastically reduced. And most importantly, the lives of all 7 crew members would have been saved. This disaster stands as a profound reminder that engineering ethics and system dynamics aren't just theoretical concepts, that they have real consequences, and having that courage to prioritize safety must always come first. Thank you. And here are the key references for the Challenger case study, the system dynamic models, and the Aristotle's virtue ethics. Thank you.